address any questions you have about predictive analytics. You can think of this as the free consulting segment of our webinar, Open Access to the Modeling Agency's Advanced Analytic Gurus. Senior consultant Scott Terry, and we have Scott Clendaniel with us today, another highly seasoned consultant, very long-time colleague of mine. You'll be in great hands. It would take quite a while to go through all of Scott's credentials. I know we had introductions at the beginning of the webinar, but suffice to say, Scott has tremendous depth of application experience in the financial industry, in insurance, in CRM, in online analytics. The list goes on, as well as awards and accolades. I know I am safe to set the bar that high, Scott, because you always live up to it, and it's fun to have the banter. In the event, now I did note that Keith had to step out, or Keith had to go entirely because he's going off to a recording session. Scott Terry stepped out. We're hoping he will return. So Scott Clendaniel, so glad that you're here so that you and I can field these questions and give some great responses back for a pretty good-sized group who's still with us. So let's go into the first question. This is from Bernice. How can predictive analytics be used in higher education? I will offer just two quick areas which I've heard of a lot in higher education with predictive analytics. One would be certainly in attracting new enrollees in looking for, well, just like you're aware in CRM analytics, what we call, customer acquisition. This would be student acquisition, looking to, attract new students. And the second part is who's going to perform the best based upon students that performed well in the various programs. So that would be my throw out there as far as where predictive analytics can be used in higher education. Scott, what have you seen?
Those two are very good examples. The other one I would suggest would be likelihood to complete a particular certificate or program, basically the inverse of an attrition model. And the other one is next most likely course, which helps quite a bit with scheduling.
Oh, good point. That's right. Next most likely course. Terrific. Okay. And looking here, yes, Scott Terry not back yet, so we'll continue with the next one. Pavan asks, as far as Scott Terry's segment, he said, good take on logistic transformations. What other types of transformation comes to mind? And I'll extend this question a little bit if you allow me, Scott. Even before the transformations, feel free to talk about any other transformations that you talk about, but I think let's blend in some of Keith's advice in the strategic part of the event and what guides the ways in which you're going to transform. And I'll lead this a little bit. We want to talk with our subject matter experts, right, and our domain experts, because a lot of the ways in which the data was collected is going to drive how we transform the data and what methods or techniques we're going to use to transform, as well as derive new variables. I think just having dates for certain kinds of applications doesn't mean much to a predictive model, but duration does. So you have to at times derive new variables, and you want to get the duration from, say, a start date and an end date of maybe a subscription, and that duration has much more meaning to a model. And if that hadn't been created, all of those rookies who simply introduce raw data to a modeling algorithm is going to cut themselves short, as well as not understanding the full context of how the data was collected. So that's quite a bit of a lead-in, but and it also can, I think, support how you prepare data. And this goes back to Scott's segment, where sometimes outliers are the points of greatest interest, especially when we're looking at predictive analytics that looks at the low occurrence, high impact type of data. So there's a lot to go into how data is prepared and constructed and transformed that has so much impact on not just model performance, but the success or failure of a project. So I took a very short question and extended that out into almost a diatribe. So good luck. I'm going to toss it up and give you the mic, Scott, and see where you'd like to take Pravin's question.
Sure. I'm going to give one of the techniques that I've been using a lot recently and actually presented out at the Global Predictive Analytics Conference in Silicon Valley about 2 weeks ago. One of my new favorite techniques is to take each your potential inputs and just use that single input and put it in a decision tree. And you may be thinking, well, why on earth would I do that as data preparation? And there are a couple reasons for it. One is the tree will automatically handle all your missing values because it will assign it to a group. So that's out of the way. Two, it's impervious to differences in scaling. So whether it would ordinarily need a log transformation or some other variant 1 over x, square root, et cetera, and so forth, because it is not impacted by scaling, it will actually come up with natural splits for all of your inputs. It handles binning for continuous variables where you're like, I want to have my first group be 1 to 5, my second group be 6 to 8. It'll actually decide those cuts for you. And it also takes care of a bunch of other problems, and I won't bore you all into a stupor. But that's a really easy way to do it. And if you look at the tree for each of your inputs as you go through the process, very quick way to learn a lot about your data the fastest.
Outstanding. And Scott, I should preface with, you probably hear me extending my responses here as well. We have a good-sized group, a few dozen still with us. A few are now having to leave.
I'll go faster, I promise.
Yeah, oh, no. It's just the opposite. we don't have to share the stage with Keith and Scott Terry. And
sure.
Kind of a shy group here. We do have more room for questions. So if you want to expand, do feel free. That's what I've been doing as well here to try to offer up a little more content.
Happy to do it.
A few questions. Yeah, a few questions we do have. But that's fantastic advice. Pavan says, wonderful. Thank you for your inputs. We'll take that as kind of a pun in the way that we use input. So thank you as well, Pavan. Bernice follows up to her question, I think, with a comment after your contribution to her question. She said, those are 4 areas that we're having issues with at the community college level. I'll try to help my college understand how predictive analytics could be very helpful for us. Very good webinar. Well, thank you, Bernice. And feel free to have your colleagues come back and attend the webinar. It's not vastly different every time. Of course, the Q&A, highly interactive. We do change content from time to time. Month to month, it's going to be a lot of the same presentation material. So for your colleagues who have not attended, welcome them back. You go to the webinar page at our website, and you'll see the next 3 monthly productions. And they're welcome to come back to seed some ideas, maybe motivate, demystify predictive analytics, and kind of set the the groundwork for how to properly approach it. And if you were here early enough for those quips in the waiting room before the event started, there's a lot of humor, but there's a lot of truth to it, just like a lot of humor out there, right? A lot of political humor as well. There's a lot of truth to it. And there's one that states that, starting an analytics project with data and software is like starting a book on chapter 5. You're starting without the greater context. And I think that's where, Scott's latest answer comes into play as well, that there's a lot to consider with before the data, and if you're looking at transformation, you need to not only look downstream as to how it's going to be applied and deployed, but you have to look upstream as to how it was collected, how erroneous is the data. Your domain experts will know this. How much can you trust each attribute that you're going to include? So there's a lot that comes into the transformation of how that data is going to be prepared in the context of the problem, in the context of the resources collected, in the context of how it needs to be operationalized. If you're not looking at those kinds of things in advance, you're going to end up, it's like being a mechanic. You're going to be tuning an engine to help that car run faster in the wrong direction. And we see it all the time. You'll be driving at a faster rate of speed off course. And that's what we want to help everybody avoid. There's a lot of concentration on the algorithms and big data and R and like I was saying, those shiny objects. But we've got to concentrate on the end product, and that's having measurable results that are adopted by the organization and understood by leadership. That at the end of the day puts the organization ahead, makes you more valuable as a data scientist. Catherine asks, this is a question I can take, will we be able to download the slides? The only reason we don't do that is to encourage live participation. We love it when people participate with us in the live polling, and see what variance is there from presentation to presentation, and of course come into the Q&A. So with that, we've got 4 minutes left. If there are any other questions, Rich says, excellent, insightful, gives me guidance on making sure we have good strategic intent at the outset. Thanks for the comment, Rich. And with 4 minutes remaining, we'll give a last call for any questions. I'm almost tempted to go into like a seed question here. Good-sized group.
Well, I actually
appreciate that. Oh, yeah, by all means, Scott, stage is yours.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I actually have a question for the group, if you would respond to Eric in the chat. And it's a pretty simple question. Do you already have an analytics project in mind that you want to start with, yes or no? And what is it? And the reason I ask the question is it helps Eric and I to sort of customize the presentations in the webinars going forward. And also, it helps us to understand what your needs are, because these webinars are put on for all of you guys, and we want to make sure that we're giving you the best content possible. So again, the question is, do you already have a specific analytics project in mind? And if so, what is it?
That's a great idea, and that worked, Scott. Let's not just have our own seed questions. Let's invite them and see the ideas for questions from the group. Rachel
Sure.
comes back with, yeah, that really worked. It's certainly easier when you can wedge in on me that can ramble endlessly. So Rachel says, yes, determining pricing for B2B transactions. Kind of open-ended. Rachel, if you have any more specificity, yeah, we can certainly entertain that. Scott with his library of experience. Otherwise, Scott, it's a broad landscape there. Feel free to drill down where you want. Determine pricing for B2B transactions.
Sure. Determining pricing is really challenging, especially in the B2B market, in that in the B2C market, it's easier to run testing and keep the specific pricing that's offered to each individual customer sort of on a one-to-one basis. When you're doing pricing for B2B, the problem is it's either based on our response to a bid or proposal, or you've got to publish it out on the website so that everyone can see it. So what I would suggest is actually it's going to be a combination between testing and a model, and you can actually use results of the model to inform what type of test to run next for pricing. If you have a large enough number of past events, you can actually figure out what the effect of the change in price was on the outcome. If you have a smaller number of events, you will have a heavier reliance on testing.
Terrific response, and what a great idea to put that question out to the group, and it worked, and one more great interaction without us having to go to a seed question. And I know it was an attentive group. I can tell from the panel here, and so grateful for everybody staying with us. It was a great participation in the polls as well. But at 29 minutes after the hour, we better draw this event to a close. I'd certainly like to thank our attendees today for, like I say, your sustained interest and your active participation, as well as Scott and Keith for their great presentation segments and the highly informative Q&A contributions by Scott Clendaniel, who acted in a very last-minute moment here when I knew that Keith could not remain. And Scott, thanks so much on such short notice to come in.
Oh, and, sure, Eric, happy to help.
Yeah, and field the Q&A. Fantastic. Truly grateful. And I know the participants are as well. So we'll follow up with an email shortly with some resources and suggestions that will hopefully be useful to you. And from there, we'll hope that you'll consider joining us at a public classroom or live online training event soon. Make sure to go to the website and check out the schedule and details for next month's live online experiential training, followed by future productions in Seattle in July, live online in August, and Washington, D.C. in October. On behalf of myself, Scott, and Keith, thank you again for attending Predictive Analytics Failure to Launch. Have a very pleasant afternoon and evening, and this brings the webinar broadcast to a close.